around the 1980s in the context of a crisis of the environmental movement as well as of the great world religions. But it had been in the making for a long time, and its origins can be traced back at least to the 17th century and Spinoza's pantheistic philosophy, which assimilated both the nature and the divine. To the second half of the 17th century and romantic idea of nature philosophy, and to the 19th century, more especially to the works of American thinker Thoreau and American philologist George Perkins Marsh. In the early 20th century, it was foreshadowed by some pioneering figures like Mahatma Gandhi, who popularized non-violence in India. The guiding principles of eco-spirituality, though, were established in the 1970s, coming from a wide range of theoretical perspectives, which include scientific ecology and the Gaia hypothesis, propounded in the 1970s by James Lovelock, a British specialist in atmospheric sciences, and in philosophy with a deep ecology, the idea of deep ecology, put forward by Norwegian philosopher Arne Nash, and the ethics for the technological age, promoted by German philosopher Hans Jonas, to name only these two thinkers. And finally, to come to political ecology, a vast movement fueled by many diverse influences like feminism, third worldism, degrowth, pacificism, non-violence, etc. All these ideas appear at the same time as New Age, a movement encompassing very diverse spiritual practices and religious beliefs, and favoring an eclectic approach to spirituality in the USA and in Europe. In the 1980s, the eco-spiritual movement gained momentum in activist, intellectual, spiritual, and religious circles. The proponents of eco-spirituality do indeed come from very diverse backgrounds, but even in their approaches and motivations, which can be either scientific research or activism or intellectual debate, can be very different. They nevertheless share quite a number of essential values which stand in opposition to those of modern Western societies. They believe that Western societies are founded on materialism, the quest for economic profitability and technological progress, and that they are mostly responsible for today's environmental crisis. They generally take a critical view of the Enlightenment and instrumental rationality, which they consider as the cause of the disconnection between nature and culture in Western societies. According to them, the solution to the environmental crisis cannot be found within the framework of shallow ecology. Now, I talked about Arne Nash and this concept of deep ecology. So there is a subtle difference between what we know as deep ecology and what we know as shallow ecology. Because deep ecology is or speaks about the conservation of nature for the purpose of nature itself, while shallow ecology, it advocates that nature must be conserved, thinking about the future human generation. Like we often talk about, if we use all of our resources, what are we living or living behind for our future generation? So this is what encompasses the idea of shallow ecology. And therefore, the solution to the environmental crisis cannot be found within the framework of shallow ecology, which limits itself to managing the environment, but necessitates a radical shift, a profound inner change, when humankind understands that it is not separated from, but part of nature, and that its fate is linked to that of the biosphere or the cosmos, to that of creation or the great living one, it will invent a new way of inhabiting the earth, which is its home, which it will learn to respect in the deepest sense. Whether they belong to a specific spiritual tradition or environmental sensibility, the advocates of eco-spirituality call for re-sacralization of our relation to nature and consider the earth as a living organism. The upsurge of interest in Eastern religions and practices like Buddhism, Yoga and Hinduism, Taoism, Feng Shui, Chinese medicine, Shiatsu, springs from the vision of the human as a whole, body, mind, and soul. The New Age movement can be referred to creative principle. Nature is thus endowed with an intrinsic value and with rights becoming a subject in itself. Now, coming to the scientific perspective of it, consciousness exists in everyone, but manifests itself in different ways. With the reality that all matter is energy vibrating at different frequencies, it is reasonable to say that all matter has consciousness in its unique way, since all matter comes from the same source and is comprised at its basic level of the same building blocks. This universal principle can be seen in DNA consciousness as well, and is true for any state of energy, be it a solid, liquid, gas, or plasma, and can manifest as plant, animal, human, crystalline, or higher dimensional life forms. Plant consciousness is evidenced by the process of biocommunication in plant cells, which means that plants are sentient life forms that feel, know, and are conscious. Now, ecologist Susan Simard, the founder of the research project, The Mother Earth, has shown in studies since 1997 that trees communicate with each other through fungal systems called mycorrhizal networks in ways more intricate than what was previously known in the field. More recently, her research also proved that the diverse structure of forests on which humans rely for clean water and air depends on the preservation of old trees. And we have reference to this particular character with one of our characters in the novel. And also, Susan Simard points out another interesting thing, that is, plants do send signals to each other. And as soon as there is an enemy, an exterior enemy, who is supposed to attack one plant, the plant will send its coded message to the plants that are surrounding it. Now, the Overstory, which was published in 2018, is an American work of fiction by Richard Howells that ecologically and scientifically talks about nature. The depiction of trees in the Overstory urges readers to view them in a possibly new way. The novel presents a deeper and less anthropocentric understanding of trees than the conventional one. It does this by recognizing trees as active sovereign entities with their own language of chemical signals, by portraying them as having agency and by placing them within their own concept of time. The radical otherness of trees presented by the novel makes them into more than aesthetic objects and works as a subversion of anthropocentrism, showing that trees possess a completely different perspective of the world than humans do. In the very beginning of the book, a woman is sitting in the forest and the trees around her communicating with her, possibly through some kind of chemical signals or sense. Their message is rendered in words, and the trees say to the woman, and here I quote, "Your mind never sees us grow. You miss half of it and more. If your mind were only a slightly greener thing, we would drown you in meaning." The central structure of the Overstory idiosyncratically follows the architecture of a tree. Each section, like the story that Olivia was mentioning, it's on a similar strain, that each section named after each component of a tree. Like it's mentioned roots, trunks, crown, and seeds. Following this structure points to both the biological and symbolic skeleton of a tree. This eye to a specific fragment, and in doing so opens them up to a range of symbolic associations. In this way, the very structure of the novel asks the readers to visualize their position in the novel according to horticultural classifications. The trees as organic organisms are already structuring and telling stories in media of their own invention. This is what I have quoted from the text. Through their needles, trunks, and roots, again quoted from the text. As the very being ensures their semiotic engagement with the world, recording, again quote, in their own bodies the history of every crisis they have lived through. And in this novel, the humans seem to be simply the understory. Therefore, this novel is named The Overstory, as most of them become entangled within a wave of activism and find each other together amount of time to save trees because they feel and understand trees are fellow breathing beings which are being systematically destroyed because of problems. Now, the overstory shows how the characters flourish in their spiritual awareness of part and oneness only when they open to the deeper awareness of greater cosmic frame, where every state they make or do not make, every little or big choices all have an impact on themselves. The trees get tied to in more than one sense and the planet. The novel shows the issues of deforestation from multiple perspectives in the shape of independent and interconnected storylines, and by managing to give an overview of contemporary deforestation in the US. The action of the novel takes place across decades in the lives of 9 human protagonists involved in various ways in the 1990 Redwood summer in California, an environmental movement protesting against the clear cutting of old growth redwood trees, which was part of timber wars that lasted throughout that period. By then, the sequoias and bird trees, which dated up to over 2,000 years, constituted only a minor percentage, round about 3% of the old growth forest that used to cover the US territory. And here I must mention that when we refer to sequoias and redwood tree, although they belong to the same family, but they are a bit different from each other, and therefore here I have mentioned sequoias and redwoods, which is a bit different from the traditional sequoias. Now, one of the characters in the novel, Nicholas Boyle, who is a descendant of Jordan Hall, a Norwegian immigrant in the rural Iowa, in the long line of his family saga, is tied with a big red chestnut tree, which was planted in their farm by his ancestors. It became a hereditary habit for the Boyle men to photograph the tree regularly to capture its growth and change as a pregnant symbol of the family's progress, grounding, and growth in their new land. This is the US. In the overstory, family relation between men and trees is put forth in its literal violence by activist discourse, where deforestation and logging are compared to family massacres and cannibalism. And here again I quote, "Let's grind up grandfather for dinner while he still has some meat on him." Now, Nick is a casual artist. Nick is shorter form of Nicholas. So Nick is a casual artist who is unsure about his artistic qualities, but his life changes when he meets Olivia. After Olivia dies in her attempt at arson, meant to block the destruction of the giant redwood forests, Nick wanders as a nomadic and continues to write his artistic and provocative messages in nature. He is never caught by the authorities, and at the end of the novel, there is a hope that his tree art will bloom into fuller meaning. He creates by framing this particular word still, STILL, in gigantic letters, made of tree trunks and only visible from space. It is a stillness and apparent quiet which swarms with life and motion, even if apparently immobile for our human kind. And again I quote, this is at the end of the novel, or towards the end of the novel. "Already this war, meaning still, already this war is greening, already the mosses surge over, the beetles and lichen and fungi turning the rocks to soil. It is a continuous metamorphosis, seed into tree, tree into soil, that will feed another seed in a spiraling motion of life, death, regeneration." Olivia Vanderbilt, later named Maidenhead, is alive with the giant redwood trees. She is a former student who, after an accident, electrocution, and a near-death experience, comes back and feels in touch with a spiritual voice, inspiring her to get involved in the eco movement against the destruction of the giant redwood simply by her intuitive understanding of what seems to be a message sent out to her specifically by trees. The road trip takes her by the whole chestnut tree, where Nick joins her for the rest of the way to California in defense of the redwood trees. These trips from one tree to another culminate in a journey entirely mapped out in a tree during the tree sit. And the name of this tree, the name given to this giant redwood tree, is Mimas. And what happens is, Nick and Olivia, they decide to live in that tree. Now, this tree sit was inspired by the experience of the environmental activist Julia Butterfly Hill, who spent 738 days in a California redwood tree between 1997 and 1999. Now, this redwood tree, Mimas, it appears as a cosmos in itself, a tree that amounts to an entire world and calls for religious comparisons. The cutting down of Mimas, finally, leaves behind a denuded bridge, suggesting nakedness, vulnerability, and loss. However, we are repeatedly confronted with the future promise of the forest reclaiming ground, even urban ground, in its unstoppable growth. Jungle will get Bangkok before too long, LA one day. Now there is another character, Mimi Ma, who is a bright and successful daughter of a Chinese engineer. Okay. And she is connected to a mulberry tree. Now I will just, since time is short, so I will just talk about the connections that our different characters have with the respective trees. Now when we talk about mulberry tree, it's very important to recognize that mulberry tree in itself, it encompasses the male and the female. And therefore it is said that it is something that dates back to before the separation of yin and yang, male and female. It represents the Tao or the all-encompassing cosmic order. And we have other characters as well who are connected to a tree. And the most important aspect that I want to talk about here, about a couple who are not probably specifically involved in any kind of environmental movement, but we find that there is a character named Ray Brinkman and his wife is Dorothy Brinkman. So Ray Brinkman, he is a corporate lawyer, and for his entire life he has devoted himself to the rights of the people. So he protects the rights of the people and ensures that people get whatever is their due. Now one day, when he reads a text that is titled, and originally this text is also available, Should Trees Have Standing? This particular text induces him to make this particular comment, which I am quoting from here. It is no answer to say that streams and forests cannot have standing because streams and forests cannot speak. Corporations cannot speak. Either normal statutes, estates, infants, incompetents, municipalities or universities. Lawyers speak. Next we have the most important character, who is Dr.